All right, thank you all for coming to this session on community institutions as cornerstones of U.S. Peacebuilding. My name is Lindsay McLean, and I'm your moderator for today's session. I'm also the Executive Director of Generations for Peace USA. We engage children, youth, and adults in experiential learning, inclusive dialogue, and collaborative action to transform their communities into places of safety and belonging for all. Today's session is co-organized with Generations for Peace, the Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact, and essential partners. And we're joined by 5 esteemed panelists who are going to be talking to us about community institutions as cornerstones in advancing peacebuilding in the U.S. So please allow me to introduce them briefly to each of you, and then their longer bios, of course, are in the agenda. We have Dr. Betsy Hayes, is the Dean of the Rhodes School of Arts and Humanities at Bridgewater College in Bridgewater, Virginia. Beverly Braxton is founder of We the People Warwick in Warwick, New York. Mitch McKinney, thank you all for sitting and mostly in here, I appreciate that. Mitch McKinney is the Deputy Police Chief of the Apex Police Department in Apex, North Carolina. Rebecca Stresta is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director of the Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. And last but not least, Rhonda Hawks is the Executive Director of the Comer Education Campus in Chicago, Illinois. So we have a pretty good swath of folks from the United States across the United States. And now I want to just frame the topic at hand briefly before we begin our conversation. So when we were brainstorming for this session, we were landing on this theme of community institutions as influential spaces, where people are coming together and constructing norms and shared values. And we found in our work that if you can find a few footholds in a community where people can experience this new way of being together, it can transform the whole way that the community feels about living together across difference in the midst of conflict and violence. So over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a conversation with our panelists and hear more about the work that they do, how they and others can best do this work to advance peace in U.S. communities. And then after about 30 minutes of conversation with them, we're going to open up this space to each of you and pose a question and really have an opportunity to be in dialogue and conversation with each other. So like I said at the beginning, if you missed it, we're having some microphone challenges. We're going to try to project our voices from the table so if people could come together a little bit closer. If you feel like that's just not working and you can't hear, let us know and we'll go back to kind of coming up here to the podium. That sounds a good plan of action? All right. So my first question is on dialogue and scalability, and it's for Betsy, who's down here at the end. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So Betsy, most of our panelists have been working with Essential Partners framework of reflective structure and dialogue, or RSD. And I think that they may be referencing that some. So could you please tell us more about RSD and how we use RSD principles to scale peacebuilding programs for students at Bridgewater?
Absolutely. So let me just double check. I project pretty well since I do this with students all the time. Excellent. Okay. Just wave if you need me to speak up. So I'll start with the first question, the first half of the question, which is what is reflective structured dialogue? And then I'll shift to how we made it scalable at Bridgewater College. As Angela noted, reflective structured dialogue is a practice that has been developed by Essential Partners, formerly Public Conversation Project, who are based in Boston, Massachusetts. The mission is to equip people to live and work together by building communities of trust and understanding across differences. The vision is to understand that our communities are strengthened by our differences. Our communities are strengthened by the differences of those inside those communities. Differences are not what separate us. Differences are, in fact, what strengthen us. They're not problems to be resolved or fixed, but rather the goal is to learn and work together to speak constructively about those differences. So the design of reflective structured dialogue is twofold. It's reflective, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means, and then it's structured. So the reflective piece is about slowing conversations down, to give people a chance to think before they speak, to focus attention on questions that are designed to get people thinking about their experiences, tapped into their values, tapping people into their hopes, and tapping people into places where they may feel pulled in multiple directions. It's structured the way a lot of dialogue is structured because it is designed to equalize the airtime, right? To provide a way to allow partners in the dialogue to have their own unique time to speak, to do go-arounds for several questions before people actually begin popcorning and asking each other questions. So the goal is to speak to be understood and listen for understanding. As I said, it's about designing a tool that shifts how we usually talk, to move from dysfunctional conversational patterns into more constructive patterns, to shift us away from polarized situations into situations where we really see people in their wholeness, in their complexity. So at Bridgewater, we were interested in 4 specific goals: helping our students deal with highly polarized conversations and to lean into those difficult conversations rather than being uncomfortable with those. We started with our students. Our students were our best ambassadors. They're the ones who held on to this practice and utilized it in classes. So much so that faculty members started inviting students into their room to facilitate conversations about abortion, to facilitate conversations about the Confederate flag, to facilitate conversations around the 2020 election. Once our faculty bought into this design, we partnered students and faculty and trained them together so that reflective structured dialogue was used in all our first year seminars. That enabled a practice and an ethos that helped our campus as a whole be very nimble when conflict emerges. So if we had situations where racist posts were put on social media, our students immediately called for dialogue on campus, and they structured the questions, and they worked with organizations that we might not typically imagine them connecting with. So they often found the very group that might be perceived as being a polarized other and invited them to share the design for the dialogue. So the scalability is really grounded in the student organization, moved to our faculty student partnerships, and then into our clubs and organizations. And that was exactly 5 minutes. So
Thank you so much, Betsy. I love hearing about that ownership of the students to take initiative and organize and develop this initiative. That to me shows that there's a lot of buy-in, which is my next question is for Beverly on language. You, Beverly, are an educator and a community activist, and you've worked with many different institutions and initiatives. How have you used language and storytelling to find common ground?
I have to use the mic.
Okay.
So I started a journey that I've not been down before, a pathway, a road that is being made up as I go along. So since I've been in my community, I was the only Black teacher for many years in an all-white community school. And I recognized that I was the one in my classroom who really talked about the things that kids really want to know regarding race and difference. And then over time, when I left school, I realized that I still had to do more work. And then when the Capitol insurrection happened, the winter of 21, I decided right away that I needed to do something because in our newspapers, a lot of stuff showed up that was really disheartening. And so I wrote a letter to the paper asking our citizens, could they imagine a different future, a different story, a story of belonging. And I said, this is not a single-handed thing. There's not going to be two people who are going to make a difference. It's going to have to be a significant number. And I'm just raising the question, do we have the capacity to imagine a different story? And out of that calling for, so to speak, 90 people contacted me. And of course, a lot of things happened quickly because I had never been on Zoom before. And I realized I had some organizational skills because I had taught graduate work to teachers around issues of social change. I knew right away what needed to be done. I asked for donations. I did trainings of facilitators. I had 4 or 5 groups of 2 groups a night. So it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday, 2 groups a night being facilitated, 10 people in a group. Out of that, one of the key things I find for social change is that I'm not just calling people forward, I'm calling people to do something. And so out of that grew We the People Warwick. And why We the People Warwick? I taught 4th grade curriculum, which is about the founding of the country. And I wanted to normalize who the we is. So our mission out of the growth of We the People is to foster dialogue. This is the language. We foster dialogue, greater understanding, and common ground among all people of Warwick, ensuring that every person feels welcomed, heard, and supported in the town that we all love. And above all, we strive for compassion toward one another by acknowledging that what we share is more powerful than what divides us. So, I have a few minutes. So what's been beautiful about this process is that who shows up should be there. And out of that, a lot of people, 2 things I was smart enough to do. As soon as they signed up, what can you contribute? Who do you know? What resources do you have? What contacts do you know? And out of that, I began with a skill base of people who are quite talented and also wanted to learn different things. So we have created out of this process 4 groups. And those 4 groups, one is on storytelling, because I feel the most powerful thing about social change is the power of hearing human stories. And I knew I loved listening to the moth, and I knew that the moth had a 5-minute storytelling event that I decided to model in my community. So I'm seeding storytelling. We've had 3 or 4 storytelling events. We're having another one in here where 75 to 80 people come out to hear a 5-minute story around the human experience. It can't be around race, can't be about indifference. Has to be about a human experience of resilience. The second thing we decided was youth. Youth was probably the most important area for us to touch base with. We identified questions that we felt working with young people. What are the challenges you feel are the most difficult to navigate today? And out of that, we started a survey throughout the community where we asked anybody working with youth, including youth, to answer. The last area that's a pretty big deal is mental health. We decided that whatever we decide as an action should cross all boundaries of difference. Mental health is a major one. We've had 2 conferences. I just finished one last Saturday, where we look at what are the challenges we're all facing, where do we want to make change in our community around those issues. And so I'll just end with this. I have some of these brochures in the back. Dialogue leads to connection, which leads to trust, which leads to engagement, and in so doing, removes the obstacles that obscure our humanity. I just want to put a pitch in for essential partners on their reflective dialogue. That is the most powerful process by which we social change in my community. People really deepen their own, not only their understanding of others, but their own understanding of their own bias.
Beverly. Of what you said, that the language is dialogue. And I imagine that through the dialogue, you also form a common language. And expecting on collaborations and partnerships for Mitch. So Mitch, in his role with the Apex Police Department, has been very committed to community outreach and the partnerships. So what have been some of the most successful collaborations you've seen and you've been part of, and what are some lessons that you learned along the way?
So when we look at the principles of community policing, we see some of the themes that are inherent to the Photo Voice project. We understand that we have to build relationships or start relationships with our community. And relationships lead to trust, trust leads to partnership, partnership leads to problem solving, and that is the synergistic circle of basic community policing. I had a defense attorney contact me who's in London and asked me to be a student in this process, to go through the training with a very diverse group of individuals. There was an additional police officer, because I can't do anything by myself, probably gonna have a partner. Supposed to, well, this is up crap. I've been up since 4:45. So I was kind of tricked. They really didn't tell me what Photo Voice was going to be about. I said, hey, it would be great if you would partner. And when we set in a different virtual sessions, it became very clear to me that no matter where we are, this was an extremely diverse group. I had individuals that were less than enthusiastic about having a police officer sit through this training. Within 3 sessions, their viewpoints completely changed. They realized that we wanted to partner, that not everything that you see next door about your neighbor is accurate sometimes, the need and importance of vetting social media. To go back to what Betsy said regarding the value of this, it allowed us to have very difficult conversations because we were focused on what each of these individual photos meant to us, and as we in a very structured and intentional way explained that, and then stopped because they had to cut me off that whole time period of talking and stuff. So you got me right. So what we found was, Maslow's hierarchy needs is, inherent to all of us. And we all know where we are in a space within our community, want to feel safe and have a sense of belonging. And those collaborations through this process very clearly illustrated that. And we were able to stop talking at one another and start talking with them. Which is kind of cliche, but it works. The second collaboration, I'm actually working with a group of 5th graders in a magnet school right now that has some racial tension between different groups within the school, and it's split up pretty homogenously. And what we're seeing is that racial tension is pretty homogeneously split throughout the groups. So there are 4 of us that have been working in this project so far that are signed. And we're able to connect with the kids that are part of the process, because you should see that stunning look on their face when I looked at them and said, hey, I did the same thing. Here's some of the photos that we talked about. Tell me what it means to you. So the 2 collaborations that I've been involved with were from very different demographics, very different age ranges. But the connections that we built were, universal and flowed very easily. And this tool, in my opinion, is probably the most needed in my career industry right now, to have our police officers, law enforcement officers across the nation reconnect with the community and see that what they're doing actually has merit, has value, and works, because it's a great opportunity for us to do what we set out to do, and that's help our community and partner with it. I've been doing this 26 years, and I have never seen something this effective in this short amount of time. And I'm done. Did I get other time?
Thank
Good.
you. Mitch, I'm so glad you're here. I feel like in spaces like these, the perspective of law enforcement is often missing. And it's really important that we have key stakeholders in the room. So thank you for sharing.
And she talked to me about this earlier, and the only other comment I'll say is, how unfortunate is it that we're both surprised there's not more law enforcement at the table. I've got a team, I'm gonna be leaving APEX very shortly tomorrow. An announcement will come out. I will be taking over a little bit smaller police department at another county, so I can guarantee you photos will be one of the components of those strategic ones. You don't change groups of people, you change perceptions one person at a time. This tool will help you do that.
Thank you, Mitch. We want to turn now to Rebecca, who's going to talk to us a little bit about tensions between hyperlocal initiatives and national initiatives when it comes to working with Cornerstone institutions. So Rebecca, you know this, but to share that we're not here, the 92nd Street Y, where she works, is both a place-based community institution in New York and also an incubator for national initiatives. The Belfer Center seeded Giving Tuesday, and there's a new initiative that they're starting called Share Our America that I have the pleasure of being part of in Tennessee. So Rebecca, can you tell us more about Share Our America and steps that you and your colleagues are taking to bridge those divides and tensions between the local and national initiatives?
Yeah, so Share Our America is a national initiative, and we focus on reducing polarization and rebuilding trust in communities. And I think we initially started off this work envisioning a big national plan where we were working with institutions all across the country from our home. And very quickly in our first pilot, which took place in Chadron, Nebraska, less than a year ago, which is a small town in western Nebraska, we learned from the very beginning that this work is only effective if it's run by local leaders. And I think that's something we've heard from all of you, and we were so fortunate that we were able to learn that from the beginning so that we didn't have to make all those mistakes and then learn later on. And part of that is because bridge building absolutely rests on trust. If people don't open up quickly in the room, if they don't feel safe in that room, they're not going to respond to the vulnerability that's needed to actually be able to engage with people across difference. And Share Our America does not focus on changing anyone's mind, and it doesn't focus on finding common ground. It focuses on being able to engage with someone who's different from you and see them as a human who's deserving of respect and dignity, and giving you the tools to be able to have dialogue with them from a place of desiring to understand rather than from a place of trying to persuade. And that's one of the foundational principles for reflective structured dialogue, which is one of the tools that we use in Share Our America. And so with this learning, we took a bit of a pivot early on of saying, this is actually a grassroots initiative with national infrastructure. And so what we do is we work with local community organizations and leaders. We provide the resources and the training needed for those local leaders to then go and lead Share Our America events in their communities with the folks that they have relationships with, that they have already established trust with, so that we can get the right people in that room and engaging in a way that is really meaningful, and engaging quickly. And then the second piece is, I think with work like this, the concern is not just, are we going to be able to get people to engage in a way that's quickly, but also will there be sustained impact over time. And so working with local community organizations and leaders provides the infrastructure, the networks, the understanding of local dynamics and the context to be able to have this work live on in a way that just would not be effective if we were trying to do that from New York in towns across the country. So at this point, Share America, we started in Nebraska. We then worked in Tennessee and Pennsylvania, and we're now expanding to our hometown of New York and then Florida. So we're really focusing on building up these community hubs where bridging work can start to take hold. Because what we've learned is that the number one sort of impact of this work is actually that it has a huge catalytic effect. So we went in thinking it's about building empathy, it's about building understanding, and absolutely saw those outcomes for folks in the room. But the thing we didn't anticipate is then people went on to take further action. So from our very first gathering, one of the participants He actually renovated the second floor of his church into an apartment to host a Ukrainian refugee family. Another one of our community leaders in Tennessee, she's now approved chair who decided this is her life's work, and she started a nonprofit to do bridge building work in Memphis to work to repair the divide in the community that she's in. So that's what we're figuring out now, is how do we harness those catalytic effects? How do we continue to grow throughout the country while maintaining the deep local roots and that impact that we've seen in truly local initiatives?
Yeah, 5 minutes goes so fast, really fast. Thank you, Rebecca. For me, the importance of piloting, starting small and learning before you scale at once. And I love that unexpected outcome. And I think it's so important in our work to measure things that we don't forget to ask about what were some of the unexpected things that came out of our programs. All right, our last question for this round, last but not least again, is for Rhonda. We're saving the best for last, perhaps, and we want to hear from Rhonda about resourcing needs for greater impact. So the Cobra Education Campus, where Rhonda works as the executive director, is this really unique and special place in Chicago. It has everything from a youth center to a high school to a community garden to health clinics, and a library there as well. It's firmly anchored in the community. And we have many different partnerships there, including with Generations for Peace, where I work, and we've worked together since 2019. What are some of the resources that would help enable the Comer Education Campus to have an even greater impact on peacebuilding?
I think we've done a lot of work over the last several years, pre-COVID and through COVID, and now in reaction to the level of violence that we are seeing. I know Chicago gets a lot of aggression, they're not the only place that has violence in the United States, but it's a very, very particularly that the Comer Education Campus is located. So when the state did analysis, it's one of the top 20 communities in pretty much every negative statistic you can come up with, whether it's unemployment, violence, gun violence, health outcomes, you name it, bad stuff is happening here. And so having to channel change in that, there's a lot of feelings of change going on. And what we really see is building on this whole conversation, but grassroots is where the support is needed. So as an executive director, my team, we write lots of grants because we're completely, grant funded, whether it's state, federal, philanthropic, foundation, individual, all grant funding to make such programs really big. We started working more intentionally with community partners and have for decades. But out of this, the need that really just became exacerbated, we started working more deeply together. And when I did that, I realized how much more was being done by really lack of elderly volunteers in the community. So the first step was I could house them, right? So people need a space to actually meet and congregate and do the kind of training and work that we just talked about here. And so we offer that space, beautiful space where people can come, have us give their mailing address, their home address, and that building and host events and whatnot. But then you kept digging further. It's like, well, what else are you doing? So we have this great organization called Operation Neighborhood Safety. They literally go and take over gas stations so that people can pump their gas without worrying about being carjacked, which is a huge thing in Chicago. So they call it Operation Safety Pump. Well, you think it's like, oh, that sounds great. It's like, well, it's like, wait a second. We've got volunteer people having to coordinate with the police to come in those events, doing outreach to the gas stations themselves, getting volunteers to come, putting themselves at risk by being out there in this environment, and then using it as an opportunity to engage with people in the young people or old, whatever in the community, to help me guide them into a different path. They were doing it 100% volunteer. And it was outrageous. It's like, my God, that's like literally the safety of the community is resting on the backs of volunteers. It's just not appropriate. And so we were able to write a grant writer to get resources to help those organizations pay staff get resources, supplies and money for t-shirts and stuff like, so that they can count on, the budget that they can work on for the whole year, as opposed to having to fundraise for copy people. And the injustice of that is really sad. So yes, we absolutely need financial resources to make it all the way through to the people who are literally doing the work on the ground. And everybody's frustrated because there are a lot of people who take credit for the work that's being done, but they don't actually do anything, but they're just good talkers. And so the talkers are getting the funding, but the people actually doing the work aren't. So I feel like that is a huge issue, and it's an equity issue, because again, who are these people? This community is 95% Black. It's, it's like that's who is getting gypped. That's who is bearing the burden, as well as the lack of resources for that work. I think that is really, really critical. And I also think like the ideas and everything being shared here, having easy ways to collaborate and learn this information, I think is really important, because people out there doing the work, they're in it day to day, but they don't necessarily know about I'm just here taking furious notes, because I want to make sure Christian's right, the kind of conversations that they can bring back to the community, and then we can post those events. So I think financial resources and access to information and training for free, because again, financial resources are, they don't have to, so those are the combined.
Yeah, thank you, Angela, as well, that is really. Rhonda, that reminds me, and I think this whole process of putting together the panel was challenging in a great way, because cornerstone institutions, I think they tend to be thought of as very like physical spaces, very place-based physical spaces, and some are, but doesn't have to be. I think cornerstone institutions can also be more informal, and it's like Julia Roy said yesterday, we need to complexify things and have both and really in any context, the US included, you need those institutions that are kind of formal, but also you need the informal, and how wonderful that you all are finding ways to be able to work together. So I hope the audience, you all are ready to participate and engage in this conversation with us. Just by show of hands, how many of you work on peacebuilding issues in the US? Okay, great. How many work abroad or internationally? And how many work on both? Okay, good. So we are well represented here. We can learn from one another. We're going to open it up and make this more of a free space where people can share and speak, ask questions, and offer comments. I do have a question that I'll pose. Feel free to use it or to ask other things. I do ask though that in your remarks, just keep them concise, because we'd like to hear from as many people as possible, and time is going to fly. And I think we'll take a couple of remarks from people, and then we'll give our panelists an opportunity to respond to any questions or offer their own comments. Hopefully we can do that at least twice, but we'll see. Angela's going to help us with time here. So my question that all this needs to open the space is, how can the peace building sector, which we're all represented in one way or the other, better support these cornerstone institutions in communities across the United States? So who would like to add an additional question to throw into the mix? Our
Hi, I'm Tom Reed, and I'm the Peace Rep in the USA. I think one thing we can do is get people into places where work wants to happen, where there's a group of volunteers, and get them support with a human being who gets some money that becomes a workforce. It is so hard to see sustainability when you're relying on people who are entirely 100% volunteer. They move, their needs change, their interests change. And I love volunteer, a big fan of volunteering. I volunteer all the time myself, but I used to volunteer places that have a person who manages volunteers. As someone, we need structures, so I believe in the United States, we need to do a way better job of creating a peace building workforce. And I happen to be working on a plan, the plan in America program to put that workforce in place in our country. To put some more human resources with a little bit of cash in their pocket, to give them at a time. But that doesn't have to be the only way. And if you all worked in the American Peace Corps, you know you will get paid well. So I'm not talking, this is still some drug living wage. But it's more than just holding on for dear life that I hope my volunteer group stays together forever. And I'm not at all dismissing the importance of the volunteers and the power they have together, but that sustainability, sometimes a paycheck creates sustainability.
So I think also what you're saying about these foreign American War then offers a continued value proposition of the pathway beyond it to continue the field or to branch off into other things that may support it. And so what I think I heard was developing pathways that help to bring people to continue to work in new ways with new collaborations.
Just to add what he said a little bit, the organization I worked with, work for Credit, it's a national association for community mediation, and our members have many of them are solo practitioner mediators, many of them have they're independent entities, and again, based on volunteer mediators. And what many of them is voiced in the issue with the volunteer is, especially in community work where you're trying to facilitate dialogue, the challenge is many of the volunteers are hitting a certain demographic of the desires, maybe most of the workers, maybe most of the women in work, and so there's a lack of various levels of diversity. And so then that kind of skews sometimes, not always. The receptivity of our community, right? And I would say look at noise talking instead of many different ages, different genders, for instance. As you know, someone I can go to maybe landlord tenant mediation, for example, eviction mediation, various things that they're doing, whether it's state owned in rural or urban areas and all this. But yeah, that's a challenge because who has come to volunteer? How do people have the passion? First week, don't have this time, I need to make money to volunteer, you know, so that's always a challenge. Thank you. Focus work.
Yes. I remember an organization that involved we do international and I often have this sort of like back half of international disability terminology that just doesn't hit here and isn't our primary meaning of our event. So I'm wondering from all of you, what sort of training or how do you endorse that issues and use the right language so that get people engaged in the issues that matter to them? That's still peacebuilding. We just don't talk about peacebuilding, but we what's the organization? Build up. Let's do one more and then we'll turn back to that. Yeah. I was wondering for your individual organizations, what types of collaboration you have or want to have with local governments, and what role local policy you can implement in your practice. We want to move down the line. Does everybody have something to add to what's been said so far?
Might be open. Well, one of the things I found in my community during this last few years is a longing to really feel hope. And I thought that the invitation for me is to go out, and I think it's across all sectors. And one of the things I have found that seems to open doors to the promise of bringing people to the table is talking one-on-one a lot of times. I've reached out to various government officials, the town supervisors, various mayors in the building, in the various buildings that make up my township. I've also talked to all the ministers and people. A lot of people are trying to figure this out. Even people in the religious sector, they're overwhelmed with the kind of the needs that human beings have for hope. And so, building collaborations with them and also coming up with common language that's an invitation. And so I'm partnering with I got a police, and I do training. I feel like one of the things that's really been a saving grace for a lot of the dialogue is that I train people. We have trainers that actually teach people how to be business, how to be open, how to even see their own longing. And I think that grassroots is the really necessary work that I think is critical.
We have at Dinner Centerpiece, we have a dialogue model, and it starts with 100 cups of coffee is what we call it. And it's those individual conversations, and you're really scoping who needs to talk to us about what. And that then informs everything else that you do. But if you don't start with that first critical piece of kind of getting a lay of the land and understanding what's on people's minds and where they're at, it's really difficult.
And I've gotten a police, right now, facilitating a dialogue series with a police officer who, just by meeting with them, getting to know them and building their trust. Building trust is a critical. I developed relationships and it really turned a whole different lens on what.
I just wanted to touch on the funding piece that was brought up, because I think that that's such an essential piece of the puzzle here. And something we learned in our very first pilot was that you don't pay people for their time. The people who are going to engage are the people who are already raising their hands, who are already doing the work, and you're not going to bring new voices into the group. And so we made the decision from the very beginning that honorariums and grants had to be a part of this work, and we were incredibly fortunate that the founder developer center of the developer supported that and put his trust in that we could bring new voices into this work and invest in that. But I think it's something that we see in the funding landscape, that people generally just want to fund what they're already seeing. And so we just get the same voices over and over. And you have to accept a little bit of risk, that's part of innovation. And you have to invest a little bit more money to be able to really bring a full and diverse community into the room and to be able to allow them to take on leadership roles, because people need to be compensated for their time.
One thing on that before, we were talking about as a lunch actually. Andrea, you said something that was so pivotal for shifting my mind on this, because we have some people, well, it's really on our board that are against paying stipends. And it's been an active discussion we had internally. Are we paying stipends for program implementation work? But I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to do that to be shared.
I think, there is a catch-22 because you think about maybe buying and you're looking to attract individuals who want a stipend to be the motivation to come back participation. But at the end of the day, when people are engaging, it also moves their value. And, so I think talking about the stipend as something that is just, hey, we're not going to advertise it, you recruit individuals to volunteer with our organization. But when they do sign on, they'll have an intrinsic interest. Then we'll say, unless you're not with it, I'm not going to go off savings. Because even if it's, $500 for 8 weeks of work, still $500, and it still satisfies, I did something and I got something other than just knowledge. And in some cases as well, if that stipend has to be put toward research building, like say for example, we give $1,000 and we give a percentage of this, but you have to reinvest, a percentage of that into this. There's still this element of feeling like somebody got something, not just the joy of volunteering. Which value retention, volunteer retention.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have two things on the stipend side and on the governmental side. I just think stipend is an issue of reference. In the community I work with, young people are working so they eat, and they're working so their family are working. There's 25% unemployment, and so this idea of like, oh, it's after school, so you can just, still okay, it's great, and some people can do it, but it's like dainty. And so I think this is sort of a baseline recognition of the economic environment that we're in. The other part of the equity side is people feel like they're being pimped. You know, I hate to be crass with the language, but people come in and then people do evaluations and then they go off and they write books about it. And the people who provided the information, did the day-to-day work, got nothing. They're nowhere to be found, but yet their ideas and thoughts and things are off to the races somewhere else and being spoken of in meetings and they never saw that. And so I think that there's just an inherent unfairness to some of this. Now, a volunteer is the expectation of volunteering and just a part, our mission is to help young people become well-rounded citizens for college and careers. So citizenship has responsibility, right? So volunteering as part of that, but like as the sole part, it feels very exploitative, just being real. And then the other part with the interaction with government, yeah, we do tons. I mean, in our community, partner with the local police district, which is literally across the street from our center. All levels of government, because grant I mentioned that we were able to fund community partners with was in the city of Chicago, actually the city itself, one of its agencies. And so a lot of meetings coming from all of the various governmental entities. But then the work and the partnership, a lot of the neighborhoods get the word out. And they feel like, you know, we did this study with seniors who are Medicaid eligible and Medicare eligible, obviously, but they hadn't applied for some of the benefits that they could because they didn't know. Like the knowledge gap, you know, you see people sitting there not eating, can't go to the doctor, or they can't get transportation, don't know that in their plan is transportation. Like these kinds of things are infuriating, but it's like people just don't know. And so the city's trying to like, who can help get the word out and get it properly to the people so they know the resources that are available.
I'm going to kind of piggyback on that, but go back to your question about international differences in the tool bag that you described. Because a lot of the processes, Medicaid, Medicare, for example, they're very complex. And I'm going to borrow Lena's quote from the last section. You all were in there. I'm not abashedly admitting it in front of you that complexity is the tool of the empowered, I believe. It's close to the quote. Give it a little bit of a massage to kind of give an impact. But I really think when we begin to distill what the social wants and needs of a community are, whether that community be overseas or here domestically at home, we really need to be focused on those analogous, very simplistic terms where we can, that we all share in common. And I do see a lot of competitiveness, especially candidly with the nonprofits I work with, because I think there's this perception that they're all competing for the same pot of money, which in some cases is accurate and in some cases isn't. And wouldn't it be interesting to see if we were all working for the same part of the amount, what we could do if we harness resources, we network together, and to kind of try to tie that back into your question. I really think when you're looking at policy, International Association of Chiefs of Police put out model policies that are generic frameworks that have the best practice components, but we leave it up to the individual community law enforcement service organizations to decide what works specifically for that community. That model seems to be very effective where we are intentional about it. And that would be my advice is when you're looking at where you're doing the work, try to draw those parallels and make it as approachable and adaptable to the environment that you're working within. Does that make sense?
For each of you, I mean, this is your first time coming to an AFP PeaceCon. Do you use the terminology peace building in your work? Not what do you use?
So no, we wouldn't use the term peace building, and I think we would be careful about that because would be loaded language that might immediately leave some members of our community feeling like they actually didn't belong in the dialogues, that they were already going to be asked to believe or value things that they questioned whether they really value. If that makes sense. So the language we actually use is called academic citizenship. Because we want our students to practice perspective taking. We want our students to practice what we call public reasoning, that there is a collaborative process to reasoning together. I like to tell my students that critical thinking is actually a social activity, and that they're problem solving, and ultimately that they're gaining a voice, right? I work in an institution where students are conflict adverse. They're uncomfortable with conflict. They would rather pretend that conflict wasn't happening at all. And so giving them a set of skills that teaches them how to lean in when it's uncomfortable is much more important. And so the language around that becomes really important so that students don't lead to assumptions about what's going to happen in the dialogue before it actually happens.
We generally use bridge building or engagement across difference. Engagement across difference is sort of the plainest language that most people connect to. Bridging is more of a field term in the bridging field, but we actually are just starting a collaboration with Rotary, which has clubs all across the world, and they use the terminology of peace building. So with them, we use that terminology because it's what their members connect with. So we've certainly found that you have to speak whatever language resonates with who's going to be in the room.
Well, for us, we use is the answer is the parent, right? So in a lot of, like, even with the street outreach work, the engagement is first. Safe spaces is probably more what we use, more of a focus on safety, safe spaces. And then when the word peace comes in, is after a conflict or like having peace circles or stuff like that is more of an action oriented or in conjunction with an activity. So, I mean, I don't know where it is. I know we're not, this is, I'm inspired. You know, but the idea is like we were using that as a restorative justice. So that's kind of how we do it. But a lot of it is like safe spaces, creating safe environments, safe operation, safe home, you know, like so it's focused on safety and for everything involved. And then the peace part comes in where it's like, we finished shooting, we need to intercede so that there isn't retaliation. He doesn't not me, because I'm not supposed to do it, but we've got our partners who do, and then they're going to have peacebuilding activities, and that's where the team part comes in, and you really feel the sense of not peace, you know, right over the corner.
That's so interesting. Roderick, we worked together for years, and I didn't capture that nuance, but I think in peace building, we think so much of our work is prevention. But what I think that really that you're using peace more as like a reactive, restorative,
And then safety for
preventative.
and so the beauty is to work, right? Like, so Lindsay was out with a group of our young people who were enjoying what you were doing and really engaged when I was like, this is good, you know, and then like, and but it's like, but they're not thinking about it. They're thinking about it as relationship building, as you know, is as preventative, right? Or it's like somebody's sparking, but how do you put it out? But not necessarily peace, because especially after we used to, because of Chicago, it's like, you know, peace sounds very much like it was a fight last, you know, safety sounds like, oh, we're just, you know, it's like peace. That makes, I don't know, that makes sense. John, you know,
What do you all think? You guys in the back? We can hear it up.
Yeah.
We can hear, when it comes to terms and how you have been presenting things in your states or whoever you're connecting with them. Are you consciously trying to be heard and accepted by both parties? You have a hard time sometimes with that kind of intra-political
acceptance. Is there, I think the question is, have you had successful ways of having we returns that have been successful for both parties?
We'll think on that, and back to it.
Do you want to? Yeah, I was gonna say, one of our big ones is our first pilot. We initially envisioned Share Our America as combating polarization, and we thought of polarization as political polarization. How do we reduce the effect of polarization between the political parties? And yeah, the very first pilot, we learned that people don't show up in a room as a conservative or a progressive. People show up in the room as a giant ball of identities that are all incredible. And in our very first dialogue, which was intended to be between rural conservatives and more progressive folks from other parts of the country coming together, everyone came into that room with religious identities, ethnic and racial identities, sexual orientation and gender identities, education level identities that were all not only tied into their values, but in many cases were much more important to them. And much more relevant to how they communicate across different than their political identity. So our learning and what we've seen since then is actually by opening the aperture to make space for all of those identities to be present and not trying. You don't solve a problem by being the problem. If the problem is we're putting each other in boxes, you don't put people in boxes to then try and take themselves out of them. And so by making that space to bring all of the identities, it then made it appealing to all sorts of people because anybody could see themselves in it and they weren't feeling like it was just for that group or just for the other group, because it's for people.
I will jump in real quickly, and very much that resonates with me because one of the challenges we have within, we have different pockets within our different communities in Apex that may be more pro-progressive or more pro-conservative. And when we bring them into a space, or when we're shifting our culture to is meeting them where they are, we set a clear expectation that even with my staff, we continue to say, you're not there to listen to agree as much as you are there to listen to understand, which is what I think Betsy touched on again. That she's got to be a college professor or something. But it really is, it is that simple that, you know, my staff is, for the most part, fairly career military. And if I say, hey, this is what I need you to do, go in with the mindset that you don't have to agree, but just be open-minded and listen to understand. And if we can get them there, I've found that that's a contagious effect. And they start these organic conversations and dialogues that have been invaluable.
Yeah, I think the way I frame the process that I engage people in, it's related to a theme. Like we make 4 sessions for 2 hours. The first session is really for what are our stories? And I start with people in pairs and then in groups of 4, and then we share as a whole group what struck them about the story. So I think people show up as who they really are, and I think what I learned is the first time they've been invited to share who they really are. The second, we look at the groups, your identity group, where you've been, what you feel strongly about, or how other people see you or view you. And we begin to look at that. Like I just had the first session this Monday, and the first question we asked them, we called them was, or this activity is called full spectrum listening. I don't know who's in the room. The first time these people are meeting, you're going to be in groups of 4. You're going to be listening in a way that you've never listened before. One person's going to listen for values. One person's going to listen for emotions. One person's going to listen for facts. And if there's something else with relationships, people in that room were so amazed how they never even knew what listening was, but it was so complex. And it really, someone said, you know, I've never listened to this kind of, and of course, in the process, I say to them, what did you learn about yourself? Not just what the experience was in terms of that, what did it reveal about the way you listen? And this person said, you know, I constantly battle with people, but I realize I have to listen for facts. So I think that is the way I think is the roadmap for revealing what's possible in building connection in a community. I found that it's been really for me, a wonderful learning experience.
So we're gonna move to close. I can't believe it's gone by as quickly as it has, but, you know, in these situations like this, we always give the panelists an opportunity to say their final thoughts, and I want to also respect our audience. Is there anybody that has a burning final comment that they want to offer to the space before we turn to our panelists? Okay, all right. I suggest we just move down the line. Let's start with Rebecca and head down this way. Anything that you feel like we didn't touch in yet on the conversation that you really want to leave us with, or any response you want to make to a topic that's already been discussed?
I think the only thing that I would say is that I hope that what we were sharing today resonated with you and potentially sparked some collaborations between the more sort of historical peace building infrastructure that we have domestically and internationally, and the work that we're all doing that maybe doesn't always use that terminology, but is really working towards the same aims. I think that there's so much potential for us to support each other's work. And so I hope to be able to do that with all of you, and this inspires you to find opportunities to work with those who are in local communities to be able to help grow all of our efforts to do this work together.
I would say, I'm just struck by the language. I'm really inspired here. Like just how, you know, word choice matters and communication matters, and just this idea of being flexible with your language so that you can adapt to what other people are asking. It's almost like, how do you define the word you just said? Like the whole conversation about peace building. And then it's like, well, once I understand it, I can tell you what we'll do. Once I understand what you mean by it, I can tell you what. But I may not call it, but the underlying word is the same. So I just feel like that just struck me. I think that's something I was thinking here, is that just this idea of really digging deep to understand the question that's being asked before making assumptions about what the answers I'm supposed to have.
I think two things, her conversation about these interactions that she's having within the group sections and individuals that are, you know, really kind of explaining who they are and determining who they are. There's a very therapeutic value to that, which I think has some exponential effect in maybe down some of the negativity. So I think you would find that truly within this process. The second thing, and this is probably the most important thing that I have said today, thank you for everything you're doing. We need these partnerships. What you do has value. It is still very important. Probably in this moment in time more so than it ever has been. So, genuinely, thank you.
Yeah, I think the thing that I want to emphasize for me, and maybe because I'm a teacher, or, you know, I'm an educator, I feel structure and skills are really critical to moving the landscape of conflict. And I can't tell you enough about, you know, I know people are really engaged in trying to make change, but I have seen time and time again, they don't have the skill base to really be working in a way that moves people beyond those conflicts. One of the curriculums that I use a lot in is Elevate Democracy. Has a lot of already materials that are already available that you can use for a group, but I think effective partners really, the reflective of the dialogue is a real, it's amazing what it will change in people's perspective, what they hear, what they notice that they didn't come in their own list. So I would think, you know, having the right tools is really key.
Yeah, it's hard to be last because all of these are really excellent points. I guess I would merely say that for my community, and actually it was something that one of my colleagues said to me as I was heading off to this event. She said, remember that the most powerful thing that we've all learned is how to change how we ask questions. And we now ask questions that open opportunities that are designed to get people curious about one another, rather than questions that are already predisposed towards persuasion or a particular answer. And so just learning is a skill, right? Just learning new skills about how we listen, but also the types of questions that we're willing to ask in a given moment, is truly powerful.
And I think it builds that first critical step of trust that people want to feel safe. Thank you all so much. We have 10 more minutes. Maybe we can use this as an informal opportunity to get to know each other. If you want to come up and interact with anyone. Thank you all for your respect and for being here today. And thank you all for coming in and being so late.